They do that way. Yes. I do not want to use the freaking stand-up mic. I'm gonna see if the other thing works, but how's everybody doing? Yeah. I put it right there, is it working off? Work shot. Um. Does anybody have any announcements while I'm figuring out technology? Yes.
Both of the unaffiliated candidates in Buncombe County for Buncombe County Commission made the ballot. But we're gonna reelect our girl Terry Wells to the Buncombe County Commission District 2. Pitch in $5 if you can.
All right. The unaffiliated, huh?
We don't, she ain't unaffiliated.
I know.
We ain't about that.
Right. But that's interesting, given what we're gonna talk about. Yes.
The Bioethics Society of UNC and Yoda Institute for Research are having a joint event on this Friday, March 22nd, from 3:30 to 4:30 on Zoom. It's an in-depth review on literature reviews. So if you have never done a literature review, or it's been a while, or you've never even had a civil lesson on literature reviews, this is a great resource for you to go to. You can, the link to register is on our Instagram. It's, it's about ethics society of UNC. If you
Okay.
search that on Instagram, you'll find our Instagram.
So,
The link to register is in our bio.
all right, so for people in the back, the Bioethics Society of UNC is having like, is it like a workshop?
Yeah, so the Odom Institute is bringing in someone.
Okay, so the Odom Institute, which is a really good resource, is bringing in somebody to help with lit reviews,
Yes.
which if you've never done a lit review, it is a very, very useful skill to have. And something that if you're a policy major, you're probably gonna have to do in capstone. And it's useful to have some sort of background in doing them. So when is it happening again?
This Friday from 3:30 to 4:30, it's on Zoom.
Okay, this Friday, 3:30 on Zoom. Okay, you gotta register to get a link. Who? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. This Thursday and Friday, all day, UNC Institute for the Environment is hosting the Clean Tech Summit at the Friday Center, which is across from the golf course. There's lots of really cool speakers this year, including like things that are related to environmental and clean energy policy. So if you're interested, it'll be all day Thursday and Friday.
Cool. Friday Center, that's where we usually have our public policy graduation, and I'm bitter because they're not letting us do it anymore. Not happy about the graduation scenarios.
UNC Women in Pre-Law is having a speaker this Wednesday. It's Amanda Brumfield. She's the Honors Carolina Pre-Law Advisor. It's in Gardner, room 308 at 6 p.m.
All right, so Gardner, 308, 6 p.m. The Honors Carolina Pre-Law Advisor is going to be talking as part of Women in Pre-Law student organization, which I am the faculty advisor of. So definitely go and check that out. It's good for me to know about that. So I gotta start with a random question. Who in here was telling the class about the pregnant stingray named Charlotte? Was that you? I saw her.
Oh. How's she doing?
She looked great. Yeah, I just so happened to go to Hendersonville this weekend, and we were walking around, and it's literally in downtown Hendersonville. They have this like aquarium that is smaller than this room. That literally has like fish tanks with some fish in it, and then they have one big tank that has Charlotte, the stingray, and some little sharks.
I hear she's endorsing Terry Wells for Buncombe County.
Is it? Okay. I wasn't aware of that, but yeah. But I just thought I would share that I checked out the Immaculate Conception stingray this weekend. I'm so upset about the microphone situation. So it's been a while since we've actually met. So it's good to see everybody. What we're gonna do today and Thursday is talk a little bit about ideology, political parties, political polarization, both in terms of within government and then within the general public. Today, my goal is to get through some basic stuff about ideology and some basic stuff about political parties, and then we'll focus on polarization on Thursday. I am well aware of the fact that the Tar Heels play at 2:45 on Thursday. Okay. And I will make adjustments as needed. Okay. But honestly, if I can get through what I think I can get through today, although I want to stop a little bit early and give you back your midterms, then I think we can finish up in time for people to catch the game. Not that I'm putting basketball over academic. And that is your choice to make. I am giving you the freedom to make that choice or not. Yeah. Okay, so any questions before I get started? Okay. So the next three classes really all kind of go together. And just wanted to sort of lay out a broad outline of what we're talking about and why we're talking about it. Basically, even though our government is not fully a democracy, our institutions do require some consideration of public opinion. Whether that's in terms of voting for candidates, or even the Supreme Court. Evidence indicates that they tend to align with public opinion. And so we need to know how public opinion is formed. And it's basically an aggregation of individual opinions, right? So then we need to figure out, well, how are individual opinions formed? Well, we know that people tend to seek out others that have similar beliefs and stuff that they do. They will organize to protect interests and that kind of thing. One of the things that they do is form political parties to broadly represent these interests. These parties then select and hopefully win, from their perspective, elections. They select candidates who then make policy. So in a very roundabout fashion, right, public opinion has an impact on policy. And that's essentially what it is that we're getting at in the next sort of three classes. Want to talk about how we as individuals actually form our own political opinions, because that's obviously an important step in the process. Political socialization is essentially this, right? The process by which the central tenets of the political culture are transmitted from those immersed in it to those, such as children and immigrants, who are not. Basically, it's how political ideals, how political beliefs get passed on. Mostly to children, but also to people who are sort of new to the country. And new to the political institutions and ideas that we have here. Another way of thinking about it is just asking sort of a series of questions, right? Of how do we get our beliefs? How do they pass on from one generation to the next? I think one of the most important things to understand about political socialization is that it is an inherently conservative process. You're talking about holding over opinions from prior generations, right? Which is by definition conservative. When it comes to defining what political socialization is, the definition that I prefer comes from a guy named Greenstein, who asked the following question: who learns what from whom, under what circumstances, with what effects? So we need to be thinking about, hard to tell if they're bolded, but who, what, whom, what circumstances, what effects, right? Like, is it just sort of natural for parents to pass along their political ideologies to their children? Is there a tendency for children to rebel against their parents' politics? Those types of things are what we care about. Yeah. And when we're thinking about socialization, and especially the I can't point because of the stupid microphone. It's all confusing. So the who here, right, is essentially children and immigrants. What is political ideas? From whom is what we're going to talk about next. And then the what circumstances and what effects will be sort of sprinkled throughout. There are what we call agents of socialization. Now, it makes it sound kind of nefarious, that people are trying to brainwash, kids. Maybe some people are. But in general, we think of them as agents, and there are primary and secondary agents of socialization. Okay. Primary agents of socialization are basically those people who you are around a lot but you don't really have a choice in the matter. Right, so it's your family, it's your school. It tends to be people of similar backgrounds. You know, which is generally true, obviously within a family and even within schools. A secondary agent of socialization tends to be people or groups of people that we choose to sort of hang out with. Especially because we have similar beliefs on some particular issue. So you can think about civic groups, even just like your job. Your job tends to have a socializing effect in terms of this thing just stopped working. All right, we'll try this one. Um, okay. So each one of these tends to have somewhat different impacts. Right, the primary agents of socialization often are the ones that are instilling sort of core beliefs. When you start talking about secondary agents of socialization, you're really starting to run into dangers of confirmation bias, right? Because you're choosing to hang out with people that already think like you do. So that's something you want to keep in mind. A question for you, where does the media fit into this?
Probably secondary,
Probably secondary. Why?
because one of the things we talked about is, guys have just like basically giving information, and I think that is when media was dependent, and in fact, like giving you, digital confirmation bias.
Yeah, you know, especially if you think about the media, as we talked about, and the proliferation of news sources, where you can essentially go and read news from whatever source shares your bias. That would be a secondary agent of socialization. If you go back in time to when there were only a few networks, and those networks were regulated, maybe at that point it's more of a primary agent of socialization. Because again, we don't have much choice in terms of what we're listening to.
Does radicalization or like extremism, is it? I mean, I would guess that it's more easily addressed than the secondary sources.
Tends to come from secondary sources. I mean, I can't claim to be an expert in radicalization. But you know, it would be things like church is one of the ones that is a little bit blurry. Like when you're a kid, church is a primary agent of socialization. When you're an adult and you're choosing whether or not to continue going to church, that becomes more secondary, right? But no, it's a good question. So you know, the media could be a little bit of both, but you know, probably primarily in this age of partisan media and that kind of stuff, it's mostly going to be secondary in nature. Other things that have a big impact on political socialization are defining events, sort of generation spanning events, and even personalities. But so you think about 9/11, right? You think about the Great Depression. You think about the Great Recession. You know, there are certain events that tend to affect an entire generation. Yeah, and that stays with them throughout their lives. And especially you see this with anybody who has been around grandparents or great grandparents who were alive during the Great Depression. you know, they're 90-something years old and they're still affected by it. In terms of personalities, right, you kind of have to think here about somebody like Donald Trump. You know, this huge personality that's having a big impact on American politics. And as we're talking about sort of parties and parties sort of being weakened and partisanship being stronger, you know, there's obviously some impact there. Is it really going in and out, or is that me? It's going in and out. This is clearly a day I should have taken off.
Not too late.
Thanks, Alan. I appreciate that. One of the sort of most important sort of principles when it comes to socialization is called the primacy principle. And what the primacy principle says is whatever you're exposed to first tends to stick. So what you're exposed to as a child, from your parents, from your school, and that kind of stuff, tends to be what's the longest lasting. Try this one again. All right, can you hear me okay in the back? All right. So this early learning really does have a lot of staying power. Has anybody ever seen the TV show Family Ties? Or heard about it? It was a famous show in the 80s that had a character, Michael P. Keaton, played by Michael J. Fox, who his parents were like uber liberal and he was super conservative. And it became like a defining part of that era of people believing that children were likely to rebel against their parents' political beliefs, right? The truth is that doesn't happen very often. Most kids in the long run end up sharing their parents' basic political ideas. It obviously doesn't happen all the time. You're all in an environment in college that encourages sort of critical thinking and other things like that. So in college, lots of times things change. But then what tends to happen is when you get out into the real world, which I have to use quotation marks because I've only rarely stepped into the real world. You know, you tend to regress back towards what those early lessons were. So whatever you're exposed to first is important. And this can be really important when you're thinking about immigrant populations and how they get socialized. And, you know, that's why whenever there are sort of new waves of immigrants and stuff coming in, you'll see political parties trying to sort of woo them. It's a solid approach to getting a staunch base. So let's talk about just ideological types in the US. And you're all probably familiar with this, at least in general terms, but want to just lay it out. We're doing the classic 2x2 matrix here, where the axes really are government intervention, whether you're sort of more for or more against government intervention in economic affairs, and then government intervention in social or moral affairs. And generally speaking, somebody who is for government intervention in both social affairs and economic affairs, we tend to label them populists. That's just pure majority rules sort of mentality. And if you're in the majority, why wouldn't you want the government to regulate these things in accordance with the way that you live? Right? So it makes sense. The opposite, when you're sort of against government in general, not like literally against government existing, but against government intervention, intervening a lot. That's the libertarian ideology. The two most common ones, if you're sort of more for government intervention in economic affairs and more against government intervention in moral and social affairs, that's what we would label liberal. And then if you are more for government intervention in social affairs and more against government intervention in economic affairs, we would label that conservative. Now, this can be useful, but it's more helpful to think about it as a continuum. Where, you know, people can be sort of, you know, anywhere on this. It's not like anybody is like, yes, I want the government to totally control economic life. Well, okay. There are some people who believe that. But it hasn't worked out that well. Anyway, why do you think I have this little oval in the middle?
Most of it,
What's that?
like everyone is
Like most people traditionally have been in this realm. When you're talking about the American public, generally speaking, this has historically been where they're at. When we talk about polarization more, you're going to see that this is changing a little bit now. And it's especially changing when it comes to polarization within the government. Because the people that we're electing really are not in this center anymore. They're either over here or over there. Yeah, could be up there, could be down here. But, you know, that is one sort of potential problem that we're facing with polarization. And it really gets at what we talked about in terms of representation and how representative the government is of the general population. Now, having said that, I want you to look at voting data for the 2016 presidential election. So this was Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And what this is sort of a more conservative, more liberal measure that somebody did. And, you know, you can see that in general, all the Clinton voters are down here, right? There's not that many here. Most of the Republican, the Trump voters are right in here. There's not a whole lot of overlap, right? There's also not that many people where I said that they would be. Why is that? Because Jeff's an idiot?
There's not many libertarians.
There's not that many libertarians
Yeah, it's like, it's a two-party system, so like, it makes sense.
because it's a binary thing. To a certain extent, yes, you're more likely gonna have it here. But it also has to do with the fact that these are the people who actually voted. And, you know, in 2016, it was a little bit less than 60% of the eligible voting population actually voted for president. And that's one of the things that we have to think about when we're thinking about polarization and representation and all of that kind of stuff, is what do we do with the large segment of American society that is essentially withdrawn from the political process? Right, where do their interests come in? But I just thought that was a fascinating little scatter plot. Okay. Once we form an ideology, we form, sort of strong beliefs, or really just any beliefs at all. We know that it is very unlikely that they're going to change. Okay. And that is, despite the fact that we may get new information that ought to change those beliefs. And so we need to think about the role of ideology in interpreting the truth and interpreting facts. And if you got to listen to it, they talked a little bit about it on that NPR piece. That what's going on in terms of us not really being able to absorb new information and using that information to change our ideology is that we're suffering from what's called cognitive dissonance, which essentially is the notion that it is hard to hold contradictory ideas in our head at the same time. So, if you're a Democrat and you voted for President Biden, it's often hard for you to be critical of the Biden administration, even if they're doing things that you don't like. So what do we do in that situation? We just tend to ignore those things that we don't like. And what ends up happening is people are rejecting facts because they are in some sense sort of psychologically painful, right? It's literally painful to try to get your brain to wrap around this new information and change a pre-existing long-held belief. Yeah.
But a lot of that also is because, like, the people who are scared to criticize Biden or scared to criticize Trump, not that they just voted for them, but they like align their identities with them.
That is correct. In
Which is
terms of
a newer
identities.
thing, probably.
Yeah, it is, and we're gonna talk about that. Yeah. What happens when people's identities are actually formed around ideology, or especially around party. And this is obviously related to a certain extent with confirmation bias. And so it makes it very, very difficult to change people when it comes to ideologies once they are formed. Yeah. Now, it could be argued that there are a lot of people in the United States and elsewhere who really don't have a strong political ideology. They really just don't care. It could be that, somebody could make them care and make them care in a particular way by presenting them certain information. But in general, we're sort of standing firm. All right. So talk a little bit about the party system, and I'm not going to go into great details here because I just don't see the relevance. But it is important to understand that we have a two-party system, that we are likely to continue having a two-party system. And one of the major reasons for that is the bevy of rules and regulations we have surrounding elections. And in particular, the fact that we use a winner-take-all approach to elections. So if you are voting for somebody for Senate in North Carolina, right, they just need to get 50.1%. Or really, they just need to beat the second place person. It doesn't even necessarily have to be 50%. That's a winner-take-all system. And in those situations, it is very, very difficult for third parties to emerge and actually challenge the existing party structure. What you do see from time to time, and we have seen historically in the United States, is that the parties will change. Right? So it's not like we're still the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, or we no longer have the Whig Party. And even Democrat, Republicans, how those are defined has changed over time. If you want to get all academic about it, we are technically in the 6th stage of party systems in the United States. Although there's some debate about whether or not there really is a 6th stage. But anyhow, it's a two-party system, which forces these sort of binary decisions that often make things harder to change. Since we only have two parties, we have to assume that there are going to be a lot of people who don't particularly identify with either one, or who identify with parts of the Democratic, platform and parts of the Republican platform. And what do they do when they're only given those two options? And lots of times, and obviously we have a lot of independent or unaffiliated voters in the United States. The reality of that number, though, is that a relatively small percentage of the unaffiliated are truly independent. They tend to lean Democratic or lean Republican. And when I mean lean, I mean they're like all the way over. But this is something that we want to think about when we're thinking about ideology of the party, is the fact that we've only got two choices if we're going to be a member of a party. So what do parties do? Why do we have these things? George Washington was very famously anti-party. There's some quote where he's like, "I'm not a party man, but if we're going to have them, then I'm going to try to reconcile the two." Totally paraphrasing that, but it's something along those lines. But we obviously had parties from the get-go with the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and they were super opposed to one another. Everybody likes to think that they live in unique times, and we're no different. And we do seem to have two parties today that are living in alternate universes, or at least hoping for completely different things. But it has been true in the past as well. But so what do parties do? Well, probably the primary function that we think about with parties is selecting and coordinating candidates who are competing in elections, and who will then determine policy. So, has anybody ever worked with a campaign or worked within a party? How do they select candidates? Do you see?
Generally during a primary process.
Yeah.
And whoever is able to raise the most money and sort of like garner support among people that have money, generally. And
Yeah.
not people who have like big money, but people who have like $500 here, $1,000 there, and you have to fund.
Right. So there's the primary process, right? But how do they determine sort of who's even in the primary? What role do the parties have in sort of selecting who the nominees are? In the past, they had a very large role of it, and arguably today they have a much less forceful role in it. My kind of mother-in-law, so not my actual mother-in-law, but my wife has sort of like a second set of parents. I'm sure there's people in similar situations. Anyway, they used to live in Naples, Florida, which is a Republican stronghold. And I really didn't know that much about how candidates are selected or like, it's like, where the hell did George Santos come from? Where did any of these people sort of come from? Well, they actually tried to recruit my mother-in-law to run as a Democrat in Naples because they thought that she might actually have a chance to come close to beating the Republican opponent because she was a special ed teacher. She had all this sort of volunteer work. She wasn't crazy liberal, but she actually got a call from the Democratic Party, like the local Democratic Party, and was like, "Hey, you want to run for office?" I was like, "Really? That's how they do it?" But apparently, sometimes that is in fact the case. Other things parties do, they develop a platform, right? A general set of policy goals and policy instruments to achieve those goals. It's a big part of what the parties do, especially at the national level. They help form coalitions to govern. Usually that's within the party itself, where they try to negotiate between sort of different wings of the party to get them to coordinate and be able to pass policy. The big one really is organizing and fundraising. And this is the part that most people don't see. The intense amount of groundwork that political parties do in terms of voter registration, in terms of voter mobilization, sort of grassroots education, those types of things, is a huge role for the parties. Yeah, and this is a role that, because we don't pay much attention to it, it has a tendency to kind of go away as parties get weaker, which is problematic. They do in fact serve as a shortcut for voters, right? How many of y'all have gone to vote without doing any research whatsoever on the specific candidates and been like, Republican, 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 right? Or just when they let you do like the straight ticket voting. Of course, I don't know, around here, when I would hear about people doing it, well, I always see this. Every time I go into a voting location around here, I see somebody in there with an Indian. Just going through and being like, okay, okay. Anyways, I saw a hand.
Oh, I was gonna say, we really need political parties here at UNC, like they have at other universities, because apparently our like student senate is like low-key like really conservative and like not super representative of university life.
I don't know anything about it.
Well, and it's really hard to vote because there's like 19 options and it's like selection, your top 15 candidates, because it's like ranked first voting.
Oh,
And,
I didn't know that.
and you just kind of, you kind of have to like.
It's hard. Well, that's right, because like, it is this important shortcuts, right? That you can at least be like, in general, I'm more aligned with the Democrats. So when I don't know who these people are, I'm gonna do it. I mean, it's sort of like North Carolina used to have nonpartisan judicial election, which to me is the dumbest thing ever. Right? Because talk about uninformed voters. If they don't even have that party tag to rely on, it's not like that's going to incentivize them to go do research on who these judges are. But we maintained that illusion for a long time. Anyhow, so this is important. No. No. Okay.
I was gonna say that we do have, they, for the first time implemented I think a third of the seats on the undergraduate senate are now on a party list. So,
Third of the undergraduate senate seats are in a party list.
yeah, so it's like you just vote for the party and then that slate of candidates gets elected. Only one party bothered to like make itself exist this time though, so everyone on that list got automatically appointed. So,
So what I'm hearing is that there are some issues with the undergraduate government system.
It was a lot worse. It used to be run by friends. They fixed that.
Oh, rats.
Yes, everything.
Hey, I just want to point out, I was in a frat.
I was just recording you and I left.
I was the treasurer of my.
I'm curious, I was back at my old university.
Anyways, I'm not gonna tell you which frat, but I will tell you that my picture is hanging up somewhere in one of the frat walls.
Here?
Here, yeah.
Now we have to go on.
So you're gonna have to do like a frat tour, look at all the composites, and figure out which one am I in.
Okay, guys, Saturday night.
I'll give you a hint, okay? This frat is not located in frat court.
Okay, that's.
Wait, what?
They got like a year. Like what year would it be on?
I was in school from 1993 to 1997. Yeah,
If we are able to figure out which fraternity you were in, can it be a bonus question on the final?
yeah, okay.
Wait, so 93 to 97.
93 to 97. But there can be no comments about the hair. The process of going out. I used to have hair. Believe it or not, I have long hair in college. Like down here long. At least when it was wet. All right. I guess that'll serve as our random fact. Great.
How did you find it so fast? I looked at your LinkedIn, people always said stuff like that under their education. Like.
What's crazy is you went from you to graduate honor, which is like crazy transition.
I'm bummed. I was having all these great fantasies of y'all going to like parties at fraternities, looking at composites. Find it. That's the kind of thing that's worthy of an credit question.
I know,
Google is not.
What if we find, what if we find the picture?
Yeah.
Well, now you know where to go. Everyone's just gonna descend on the DU. Like, we need to get a picture of a person.
Does anyone?
Anyway, okay. But please tell me that the picture is not someone else.
No, it's just that.
All right. All I'm saying is I had a student one time who, or a group of students that made a study guide. And they shared it with me, and there was a picture of me in there. And I was in the hospital. And I'm like, this is not okay. They're Google imaging me right now. So we know why we have parties. We know what it looks like. We know what they do. You know, the question is, how do we actually come to identify with a party? And is that actually the right way of saying that in today's sort of age where we don't identify with a party, we sort of form our identities from parties, which is interesting. what is your parents' party identification? That tends to play out. You know, if you happen to have parents that are different parties, maybe that's when you become an independent. You know, you're right down the middle. That's what I did. My mom was a Democrat, my dad was a Republican. I'm independent. Yeah. Group attachments, especially if you're part of like a labor union, a church, other groups like that, often are, the people there are aligned with a particular party. And so you may just sort of follow the crowd, in that kind of situation. Demographics are a huge portion of who chooses which party, and why. And, you know, this is everything from race to age, to geographical location, and that type of thing. That can be a substantial factor. And then also these generational experiences I was talking about earlier, when it comes to political socialization. You know, when I think about y'all's generation, you know, what are some, you know, sort of generational experiences that you think are gonna have an impact, you know, pretty much generations wide on political opinions? Y'all think of any?
COVID. Pandemic.
COVID, yeah. That's definitely a big one.
AI, maybe.
AI. The iPhone.
The death of the existential.
Yes. The definitely one.
He was a rapper.
Oh.
The other rapper.
You know, there's lots of things that happen, you know, that help form, you know, political opinions and beliefs. Even just the types of movies and stuff that are being made at that time, can have a big impact. You know, I grew up during the Cold War, in the height of the Cold War movies, like the original Red Dawn, which is one of the great movies of all time. It is a bunch of high school kids who call themselves Wolverines. Yes,
And they somehow defeat a very
Not-
realistic Soviet ground invasion.
that is correct. But, you know, it was a good movie. And, you know, look, when I was in elementary school, we had nuclear bomb, like, tests. You know, like you have like with fire drills, we had nuclear bomb drills. Where all we would do is get under our desk. And I can tell you, even as a first grader, I remember sitting there being like this is gonna help. Anyways, but you know, when you grow up with this constant barrage of sort of anti-Russian literature, right? Even movies or whatever, it has an influence. If you want to see what party identification is in the United States, at least fairly recently, you can see that there's been a big upswing in independence. There are more registered Democrats than registered Republicans, but not by much. That has historically been true, at least over the last 50 years or so, where there are more registered Democrats than registered Republicans. Why then are Republicans able to win office? More likely to vote is a big reason why. There's lots of reasons why, but Republicans are much more likely to vote than Democrats. I thought this was interesting, and so I thought it would be interesting to see what's going on in North Carolina. sort of similar. But unaffiliated is the largest group in North Carolina. Which really makes you think when, you know, unaffiliated is the largest group, but we have a veto-proof supermajority in the legislature. That seems a little bit off to me. And it makes you really kind of wonder why.
We also have to consider not just people who don't like the Democratic or Republican Party, but those who have to be independent for their job. Like if someone were to search their voter registration.
Right.
And they were
Like
to
me.
find, yeah, if they were to find like you were, or
Right.
any like certain people who affiliated with a certain party, that could potentially get them into will be like, oh, you have bias towards that certain party. Because you're affiliated with them.
You know, so there's an increase in the unaffiliated because people have to choose that publicly. Because it is public record, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or unaffiliated. Yeah.
Is UNC employment impacted by affiliations? Wait, so why did you just say that you were registered as unaffiliated?
Why did I say that?
Or did I?
No, I didn't. I did say that because I don't think that my political opinions are particularly relevant to my teaching. Right, and I just don't think that's something that I ought to be
Yeah, in a public policy
engaged in.
setting.
Right. Yeah.
Me and my family are all registered as independents, even though we all both left, and you do that in the sense that one, it gives a lot more voting. Ability like to change, especially in the primaries, because if you vote as, like if you registered independent, you can just choose the primaries, like you start what
Right.
you want to vote for. And then second, like, I know it like doesn't really do much, but like, it makes us think they're doing something against gerrymandering, you know, if they can't really like use us, I guess. Because we're technically
point.
like, yeah, I mean, technically like, you know, they still can't, but like, I'm doing the most I can in like really small, you know, structure and not really having by trying to, you know, I think,
So there's lots
That's
of
why
reasons
there's
why
more-
people may be unaffiliated.
yeah, but it's
That-
not actually like through unaffiliated,
And
like.
it doesn't have anything to
Yeah.
do with not identifying one of the party's platforms.
No, because if you would ask like my parents, would be like, oh yeah, like we're Democrats, but then you'd be like, but you're registered as
Sure.
independent, you know?
Right. No, I don't. My father-in-law registers for the opposite party. Yeah, because he likes to vote in the opposite party's primary.
Oh, my dad also does that, so he can vote for the worst person.
He can vote for the worst person.
Sabotage.
In Idaho, we
I
all
did
did
that.
that, and we got the Secretary of State, like, it was like 3 options for Secretary of State, and like 2 of them were like election deniers. And there were like 5,000 people flipped voter registration, and we elected the most moderate Secretary of State.
Huh.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have happened without those.
Go Idaho.
He won by like 2,000 votes.
Yeah,
In the primary.
nice.
Lifelong Republican. I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. One last thing, and then I'll set it up and hand back, midterms. You know, if you didn't do the New York Times little quiz, that was one of the readings, where you answer a couple of demographic questions and it tells you essentially which party you're probably in. I recommend you do it, because it is illuminating. But you know, it's just true that we can estimate party identification fairly easily through some simple demographic questions. Things like gender identity, race, religiosity is actually one of the big ones. So it's not just like religion is important, but like how religious are you? Is one of the big questions that really tilts in one direction. And, you know, I think that we're all sort of coming to realize that one of the problems with polarization and politics in general in the United States right now is that people aren't like I said earlier, they're not identifying with a party. They're forming their identity from their party affiliation. And, you know, I think that raises a lot of important questions. Like, what does this mean in terms of like identity politics? What does it mean in terms of the ability to compromise? Right? We don't want to compromise our identity. So, you know, like it brings a new sort of twist to how we think about people and parties, and how we're able to actually get policy made through the gridlock that comes out of essentially not trusting anything that the other side says. Because you know, that's what tends to happen. And you know, one of the things that we have seen, and there's again a good article in the readings about how political parties, especially the Republican Party, has become weaker in recent years. And I don't mean that from like they're not doing as well electorally. I mean the actual organization itself no longer has the same level of control over its members as it once did. You know, and this is happening at the same time that we are elevating the ideas, like the party as an idea or maybe an ideal, to just higher and higher levels of importance. So what happens in this situation is that the parties become unable to control who they nominate. That the party leadership really is overwhelmed, if you will, by personalities, by other things. And yet the party faithful, right, the adherents or whatever, are still going to support that nominee because, you know, it's better than voting for a Democrat or whichever way you want to go with it. There's interesting polling data, and I'll try to include some of this for Thursday, that shows that parents are more likely to disapprove of their children marrying somebody from the other party than anything else. That's problematic, but interesting. And then, you know, problems that this sort of weak party, strong partisanship thing causes is we do become more suspicious of the institutions. If everything's just nakedly political, then we become more suspicious, and our institutions lose their legitimacy in the eyes of the public. And then we do have these high levels of abstraction that lead to distrust and even dislike of people in the other party. If you don't even know them, you don't know anything about what they're thinking, what their experiences are, anything like that, but you just don't like them. And you see that when parents get married of the other party. So, okay. Quick little preview for Thursday in terms of polarization. This sort of gives you an idea as to how things have been going since the mid-90s, where we're seeing the two hills really separating. Yeah, and the median Democrat and the median Republican are much more extreme than they used to be. And it's happened more on the Republican side than it has on the Democratic side. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make 4 piles of exams. And you can they're in alphabetical order. So you can grab your exam and go. I will post the answer template to the exam tonight. And so you can look at it, you can compare it with your exam. The exams overall were pretty good. People didn't do as well on multiple choice fall section as I would have liked. It's smarts. I'm currently in the process of doing the math on giving back 2 points. So that is a distinct possibility that everybody's going to get an additional 2 points. So just keep that in mind. Okay. So the way it's going to work is A through D, we'll say. First name, last name. A through D is right here on this thing. E through L are right here. Probably too many for the long. M through E is going to be on this side over here. The rest are here.
I know, I looked around one and I was like, I won't. Sure enough. Yeah.
So narrative.
I'll get it next last one. Yeah, I heard you about it, but okay, I'll see you later.
Yeah. Yep. We'll see trend.
Yeah.
Hanging out with me. Oh, you know what I do? Yeah, sorry.
Should care about our youth.
I'd rather come.
I'd rather.
Yeah, so 581.
Yeah, what, you've done. What is, all they do is cry. You're not gonna grab your.
No, it's fine. You can take it in fall, so you're gonna be happy. It's a lot of work. You don't want to finish your classes. Yeah, I mean, you can't go right. I mean.
I also
Yep, see you later. So if you can, if you
Oh my god. I can't understand.
Just going on. What goal will camping prevent? I think.
You did that.
Just a little bit west of the mountains, like 2 hours from here.
Absent?
Yeah. It wasn't bad.
Things like, I can't understand your shit.
Well, when I think about what is the president's most important power, I feel like you can make a Democrat human interaction.
Yeah.
Felt like that. So I was like,